I can still hear the crack of glass against wood. The sound echoed through the funeral hall like a gunshot. My mother, dressed in a black dress she had clearly bought just for appearances, slammed her empty wine glass down and pointed at me. Her voice carried over the low hum of whispers and shuffling feet. "Half of your $2 million estate belongs to us. Sign the deed." I was holding a folder with the official seal of the notary pressed into its cover. My fingers tightened around it. I could feel the raised edges of the stamp pressing into my palm. For a moment, the silence was heavy, broken only by the clinking of someone's bracelet as they lifted a phone. Yes, someone was recording. I saw the red dot of a live stream glow at the corner of the room. It is one thing to be insulted in private. It is another to be humiliated in front of every relative, every so-called family friend, and even strangers who came to pay respect to my grandfather. I had buried the man who gave me everything, only hours before, and now my own mother turned the wake into a courtroom. I stood still. My cousins laughed under their breath. One muttered, "Easy money, Morgan." They thought I would fold right there. I looked around the room and realized something bitter in their eyes. I wasn't family anymore. I was a bank account with legs. I suppose I should introduce myself before we go any further. My name is Morgan. I am 34 years old, and I work in finance. For years, I lived in a modest apartment in the city, the kind of place with thin walls where you could hear the neighbor's television through plaster. But last year, when my grandfather passed, I inherited his estate. It is not just a house. It is nearly 2 acres of land with an old brick home that had been in the family for 3 generations. My grandfather restored it slowly over his lifetime, paying contractors out of pocket, polishing the wood floors himself. It was valued at nearly $2 million by the time he left it to me. He left it to me because I was the only one who ever showed up for him. When his hands trembled too badly to write checks, I balanced his books. When he could not drive, I drove him to the doctor. I did it without asking for anything, and perhaps that is why he trusted me with the deed. My parents knew all this. My sister knew it too. But none of that mattered when the estate became a number they could not resist. As my mother's words hung in the air, I felt 2 things at once. First came a strange calm, the kind that only arrives when you have already lived through every betrayal imaginable. Then came the heavy weight of false civility. People kept smiling, sipping their wine, pretending nothing ugly was happening, while the room curdled with greed. I sat alone at a table near the corner. On the surface, I must have looked calm. Inside, I felt invisible. The man who had raised me was gone, and the family he left behind had erased me before the dirt on his grave had settled. A younger cousin raised her glass and forced a toast. "To family unity," she said, laughing, as though the scene unfolding wasn't grotesque. The rest joined in. Glass met glass, smiles spread across their faces. No one looked at me. I was already cast out. But what they didn't know was that I had already seen this storm forming. My grandfather's lawyer had warned me there might be trouble. I had tucked every relevant document, every signed page, every recorded clause into this folder, and I wasn't about to let anyone bully me into signing away what he entrusted to me. Here is where I need to stop and ask you something. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. This story only gets darker from here. Families and money, they have a way of mixing into poison. I'll explain more in a moment, but for now, remember this humiliation can be the spark for revenge. And what they did to me at that funeral was only the beginning. After the funeral, the estate felt less like a gift and more like a battlefield. My grandfather's photograph still rested on the mantel, his sharp eyes frozen in that old black and white portrait. Yet every creak of the wooden floor made me wonder if someone had already slipped in to claim what was not theirs. I had given my parents spare keys once years ago when I thought trust was natural between blood. I learned quickly how naive that was. 2 weeks after the funeral, I drove out to the estate late one Friday evening. The gravel cracked under my tires, headlights washing over the broad porch, music leaked through the walls, laughter, clinking glasses, the faint hum of a speaker playing some dance track. I stepped inside and froze. My sister stood at the center of the grand hall, wearing a gown the color of champagne, her arms raised in a toast. Behind her, balloons spelled out, "Forever Together." It was her wedding rehearsal dinner. They had not asked. They had not told me. They had taken my home, the place my grandfather left in my care, and turned it into a backdrop for their celebration. When I appeared in the doorway, heads turned. Someone dropped a fork. My mother marched across the floor, her smile tight, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "Morgan, you made it. You should have told us you were coming. This is my house, I replied. My voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, but no one acknowledged the truth. My father slipped behind her, avoiding my eyes, muttering something about family traditions. My sister raised her glass again and said, "Don't be dramatic. You never use this place anyway. It's for all of us." I walked out before the first dance began. That night I sat in the driveway with the car engine off, watching through the windows as strangers toasted inside my living room. I was no longer invited to my own home. I rolled the keychain in my hand, feeling the jagged edges of the estate keys. They had copied them, I could tell. There was no other way they could have gained entry. The sting was not just betrayal, it was invisibility. They did not even bother to hide it. I was supposed to sit quietly, maybe hand over the deed in time, and smile while they carved my inheritance into pieces. But what they didn't know was this: before my grandfather died, I had installed a new security system. Small cameras hidden in the corners disguised as smoke detectors. It was meant for protection, now it was proof. The weeks that followed only deepened the cracks. At Sunday dinner, I overheard my mother tell a neighbor, "Morgan doesn't need all that space. We'll put it to better use." My father nodded like a man who had already cashed a check. My sister, now newly married, boasted to her friends online about our family estate, posting photos on social media without shame. I scrolled through her posts late at night, each image cutting deeper. My grandfather's study, once a sacred place lined with books and quiet, now filled with champagne flutes and cheap decorations. The lake behind the house, where he used to fish at dawn, now cluttered with inflatable swans and a floating bar. I did not comment. I did not call. I waited. Every insult was fuel. Every slight was kindling. Conflict does not always roar like a storm. Sometimes it settles like dust, thick and suffocating until you cannot breathe. My family was drawing lines in silence, daring me to step across. And I knew one day soon they would make a move bold enough that the world could not ignore. Graduation day should have been about my sister. The estate lawn was lined with folding chairs, a stage set against the backdrop of the lake. Strings of lights hung from tree to tree, and the sound of a string quartet drifted through the warm June air. Guests in pressed suits and bright dresses laughed, sipped champagne, and snapped photos for social media. I arrived late, hoping to slip into the back row unnoticed. Instead, I was greeted by the sight of my mother standing at the microphone. She tapped it twice, the speakers screeching, and then spoke in her polished, commanding tone. "Today, we celebrate not just my daughter's graduation," she said, "but the family legacy. This estate belongs to all of us, not just one person." Her eyes flicked to me like a dagger. The crowd chuckled. Someone clapped. My sister leaned over to a friend and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Morgan doesn't deserve it. They've always been selfish." Heat surged in my chest, but I stayed seated. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. My grandfather's portrait, which I had carefully placed in the foyer after the funeral, was now shoved aside to make room for a photo board of my sister's college years. Later that evening, I found myself in the kitchen leaning against the marble counter while the party spilled into the garden. That is when my phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number lit up the screen. "You should know what they're planning." Attached was a screenshot, an email chain. My parents, my sister, and a lawyer I had never met before were listed in the correspondence. They discussed refinancing, leveraging the property, and even hinted at transferring ownership under a family trust. The phrase that made my stomach twist was simple: "Morgan won't fight if we corner them publicly. Too much pressure, too much shame." I scrolled, hands trembling. One message from my father read, "We still owe nearly $800,000. This house is the only solution." $800,000. Debt I had not known existed suddenly tied to the estate my grandfather had entrusted to me. That night, as guests toasted on the lawn, a video surfaced on TikTok. One of the partygoers had filmed the speech, where my mother announced the estate belonged to the family. The caption read, "When your family steals your inheritance at graduation." The clip spread fast. Strangers commented greedy family vibes and, "That poor sibling." My sister's face appeared frozen mid-laugh. My mother's smile looked sharp and cruel. Within hours, it had thousands of views. I sat in my car in the dark driveway, scrolling through the comments, each one a mix of pity and anger from people I had never met. The humiliation had become public. The betrayal was no longer just mine to carry. I stayed quiet even then. Revenge is not loud at first. It grows in silence. and while they toasted under the lights strung across my grandfather's trees, I planned. But what they didn't know was that silence can be the sharpest weapon. I would not fight them at a graduation. I would wait for the moment when every mask they wore would shatter, and the whole world would see. My mother's birthday fell on a Saturday in early autumn. By then, the estate no longer resembled my grandfather's home. Chandeliers had been rented tables, dressed in white linens, sprawled across the lawn, and a live band tuned their instruments near the porch. Cars lined the gravel driveway, polished sedans, and borrowed luxury vehicles glinting beneath the fading sunlight. I had not been invited. That was clear from the silence in the family group chat, where my sister posted photographs of decorations, captioned with phrases like, "Our house is ready for tonight." The words bit at me. Our house. But I showed up anyway. I parked half a mile down the road and walked under the cover of dusk folder in hand, the same folder I had gripped at the funeral, now thicker with evidence. Inside were the notarized deeds, copies of the will, and most important printouts of every email and text message plotting against me. The party was in full swing when I stepped through the gate. Guests murmured as they saw me. Some turned away, embarrassed, others curious. My father stiffened near the buffet table, dropping his plate. My sister froze mid-laugh, her champagne glass trembling. My mother, radiant in a sequined gown, spotted me last. Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, raising her arms as if I were a surprise guest. "Morgan," she called. "So glad you could join us. Come, everyone, welcome them home." I did not smile. I walked straight to the stage where the band had just finished a song. The microphone waited. I took it. "Good evening," I said, voice steady. "Before we continue celebrating, I think the guests deserve to know what kind of family they're celebrating." The crowd shifted uneasily. My mother hissed, "Not here, put that away." But it was too late. I held up the folder, flipping it open. On the giant screen behind the stage, a rented projector meant for a slideshow of birthday photos, I connected my laptop. The screen lit up with the first email. Gasps rippled through the lawn as the words appeared in bold text. "We still owe nearly $800,000. The estate is our only solution." I clicked forward. Another email appeared. "Morgan won't fight if we corner them publicly. Too much shame." My sister's name glared from the sender line. A guest muttered, "Oh my God." Phones rose into the air. People began recording. My father lunged toward the stage, face red. "Turn it off," he shouted. But two men held him back, embarrassed to be near the spectacle. My mother's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Stop this. You'll ruin everything." I leaned into the microphone. "No, you ruined everything the day you tried to erase me from my own inheritance. This estate was entrusted to me because I was the only one who cared for my grandfather. And now, in front of everyone, I say this from tonight onward, none of you will ever set foot in my home again." Silence fell. My sister's mascara streaked down her cheeks as she whispered excuses to her friends. My father buried his face in his hands. My mother swayed on her heels, pale as if the ground itself had betrayed her. But the guests, neighbors, colleagues, distant cousins kept filming. One whispered, "This is going viral." And in that moment, I knew. The humiliation they had forced on me at the funeral was nothing compared to what they faced now. They wanted to make me invisible. Instead, I had made their greed unforgettable. But what they didn't know was this wasn't the end. Families like mine always have one last move, one desperate attempt to claw back what they believe is theirs. And I was ready for it. The morning after my mother's birthday disaster, I woke to an inbox overflowing with notifications. Clips of my speech had swept across social media overnight, stitched into reaction videos dissected by amateur legal commentators, and shared by strangers who saw in my story a reflection of their own family bruises. Hashtags bloomed like weeds, number greedy parents, number stand with Morgan. I sat at the kitchen table of a rented apartment downtown, my temporary refuge, while the estate simmered with memories and sipped coffee gone lukewarm. The phone buzzed again. A new headline popped up. Local family feud over $1 million estate turns public. Underneath the article, a photo showed my mother, eyes wide arm, outstretched, as if to shield herself from the truth, splashed on the projector. For a fleeting moment, I felt vindicated. Then the summons arrived. A knock at the door, a courier in a navy jacket, an envelope thick with intent. Inside crisp pages bore the letterhead of a law firm I recognized from the leaked emails. My family was suing me for control of the property, claiming emotional distress and unjust enrichment. They wanted a judge to nullify my grandfather's will, to force the estate into what they called a collective trust, one that conveniently they would manage. I read every line, twice heat rising behind my eyes. The suit hinged on a single argument that my grandfather in his final months was unduly influenced by me. Apparently, kindness had become coercion, lending an arm to steady him on the porch had become manipulation. They painted me as a puppet master, a schemer who exploited an old man's frailty. Families have a talent for rewriting history when money is involved. I drove to the estate that afternoon, gravel crunching beneath the tires as autumn leaves skittered across the driveway. Inside, dust motes floated in slanted sunlight. The party rentals were gone, but the air still carried traces of perfume and resentment. I walked the rooms with a legal pad cataloging every heirloom, every repair I had funded, every receipt I could find. In the study, my grandfather's mahogany desk sat exactly as he left it, ink bottle, fountain pen, a framed picture of the two of us fishing at dawn. I ran a finger along the desktop and whispered, "They think they can erase this." I called Evelyn next. She had been my best friend in college and was now a partner at a respected law firm across the state line. She answered on the first ring. "You saw the videos?" I asked. "Hard to miss," she said, voice like flint. "Come in tomorrow. We'll plan." Evelyn spread the summons across a conference table the size of my childhood bedroom. She wore reading glasses low on her nose, tapping each paragraph with a silver pen. "They claim undue influence," she said. "We counter with testamentary capacity. We show medical records proving your grandfather was clear-minded. We present witness statements, doctors, neighbors, clergy, anyone who can attest to his lucidity." I nodded. "And we lean on the smoking gun," she added, sliding a printout of the leaked emails between us. "This shows premeditation. They plotted to corner you. Juries despise greed laid bare." She looked up. "But Morgan, brace yourself. They'll fight dirty. They'll dredge every mistake you ever made." "I know," I said. "I have cameras receipts, the original will, notary affidavits." "We'll need all of it." Her eyes softened. "You sure you're ready?" I thought of my grandfather teaching me to tie fishing knots, his hands steady despite arthritis. I thought of my mother's glass shattering against the table. "Ready?" I said. Court dates move slowly, but gossip moves at the speed of spite. Over the next month, local newspapers ran follow-ups. Parents sue child over inheritance. Daytime talk shows debated entitled Offspring versus Greedy Elders. My father gave an interview on the courthouse steps, voice trembling, as he spoke of betrayal. The clip cut to a legal analyst who pointed out that he had in fact attempted to betray me first. Online comments swung like a pendulum. Some called me heartless for airing dirty laundry. Others applauded me for standing firm. I stopped reading after a while. Praise and condemnation carry equal weight when hurled by strangers. Instead, I focused on preparing for trial. We built a fortress of documentation. My grandfather's neurologist provided a letter confirming his mental clarity 6 weeks before signing the revised will. The home care nurse testified to our nightly chess games, evidence of sharp cognition. Even the local florist signed an affidavit. My grandfather personally ordered a bouquet for the nurse's birthday 2 days before he passed, selecting each bloom by Latin name. A man muddled by influence does not recall Latin. Meanwhile, Evelyn subpoenaed bank statements, showing my parents' spiraling debts, medical bills, failed investments, ballooning credit lines. $800,000 of desperation etched in black ink. Motive. The night before the first hearing, I returned to the estate alone. Wind rattled the shutters. The lake lay dark and still beyond the trees. In the kitchen, I brewed tea, and stood where my mother once demanded I sign the deed. I let silence settle, then spoke aloud as if my grandfather could hear. "I'm fighting tomorrow," I said. "Not just for the house, but for every quiet moment you trusted me with." The heater clicked on. Floorboards creaked. Some people might have felt lonely. I felt accompanied. Morning arrived gray and cold. The courthouse hallway smelled of old paper and coffee. My family stood near their attorney, huddled like a flock, bracing against weather. My mother refused to meet my gaze. My sister scrolled her phone, jaw tight. My father watched me with an expression I could not read, part wounded, part enraged, part something else entirely. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a woman with hair the color of frost, called the case. Lawyers rose, statements began. Evelyn's voice carried calm authority as she laid out timelines, introduced exhibits, and threaded a narrative of devotion, not coercion. Then came the clip. On the screen, my mother declared at the birthday party, This estate belongs to all of us. The judge's brow lifted. The jury murmured. My parents' attorney objected. The judge overruled. When it was my father's turn to testify, he faltered. Under oath, he admitted the debt. He admitted the plan to refinance. Finally, eyes glassy, he whispered. We were drowning. The house seemed like the only lifeline. I felt something twist inside me, pity tangled with anger, but the knot held. Choices have consequences. Court recessed for the day. Reporters swarmed. I stepped past microphones saying only trust should outlive grief. That evening, Evelyn called. They're rattled, she said. Their attorney wants to discuss settlement. I stared through the apartment window at city lights flickering like distant campfires. No settlement, I replied. We finish this. The truth deserves a verdict. She exhaled. Then we keep going. And so the counterattack gathered speed, a train on iron rails unstoppable now. My family had thrown the first legal stone. I would answer with every documented minute of my grandfather's faith. The trial stretched into winter. Outside the courthouse, bare branches rattled against pewter skies. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed, while lawyers shuffled papers and the jury learned more about my family than anyone should know. On the final morning of testimony, Evelyn placed our last exhibit on the projector, an unassuming flash drive. Your Honor, she said, this contains security camera footage recorded inside the estate on the night of the graduation party. Opposing counsel objected, claiming privacy. The judge adjusted her glasses, read the case law. Evelyn cited, then nodded. Overruled. Proceed. The footage flickered onto the screen, my sister pacing the study phone to ear. Her voice, captured clearly by the microphone I had installed, filled the courtroom. Mum, the appraisal came back at nearly $2 million. If Morgan won't sign, we can forge the notary. Dad knows a guy. Gasps rolled across the gallery. A juror covered his mouth. Another shook her head, slowly sorrowful. Evelyn paused the video, let the silence settle like fresh snow, then pressed play again. My mother appeared, stepping into the frame, whispering, Do it before they notice. We need the money. No one will blame us once it is done. I did not watch the screen. I watched the jury. I saw comprehension, then anger ignite behind their eyes. By the time Evelyn clicked the projector off, the verdict felt inevitable. Deliberations took only 3 hours. The foreman stood voice steady and read, We find in favor of the defendant Morgan. We further find the plaintiffs engaged in fraud and attempted coercion. We award court costs and damages to the defendant. My knees nearly buckled. Evelyn squeezed my shoulder. Across the aisle, my mother's face crumpled. My sister began to sob. My father lowered his gaze as though the floor might swallow him whole. Greed had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Yet revenge is never as sweet as stories claim. Outside, reporters pressed in, microphones thrust forward. I spoke only one sentence. Sometimes surviving your own family is victory enough. Then I turned away from the cameras, leaving my parents to face the spotlight they had once wielded against me. Weeks later, legal paperwork still cluttered my dining table, but the estate was mine without question. My parents owed me legal fees equal to almost half their debt. Their lawyer hinted they might declare bankruptcy. The news did not lift my heart. I felt relief, yes, but also a hollow ache where trust had once lived. I dealt with the pain the way my grandfather had taught me, by working. Each dawn I drove to the estate, parked beneath the sugar maples, and set about restoring what parties and neglect had scarred. I patched nail holes, polished banisters, and replaced shattered garden lights. I scrubbed champagne stains from the dining room rug. The labor grounded me. One cold afternoon, while hauling broken lanterns to the trash, I heard footsteps on the porch. I expected a contractor. Instead, my father stood there, hat in hand, January wind tugging at his coat. I came alone, he said. Your mother cannot face this place. I crossed my arms, unsure whether to invite him in or bar the door. He looked smaller than I remembered. Pride had deflated him. What do you want? I asked. To apologize, he said, voice brittle. I was raised to believe family shares all things, but I twisted that into taking what was not mine. He swallowed hard. The debt. I held up a hand. I know about the debt. You chose deceit instead of honesty. He nodded, eyes shining. If I could undo it, I would. All I can give is an apology and a promise to stay away unless invited. I studied him. For years I had chased his approval. Now he stood on my porch seeking mine. I felt a flicker of pity, then cooling resolve. I accept your apology, I said, But forgiveness does not rebuild what you broke. Take care of yourself. That is all I ask. He blinked, perhaps relieved, perhaps wounded, then turned and walked down the steps, footprints trailing behind him in the light dusting of snow. An apology cannot heal every scar, but it can mark the first cut of separation clean and final. In the months that followed, I directed my energy outward. I met with a nonprofit consultant and drafted articles of incorporation for the Grandfather Lake Foundation, a scholarship fund for first-generation college students pursuing trades, carpentry, nursing, electrical work, the very paths my Frenchery grandfather admired. To seed the fund, I sold a parcel of land at the edge of the property, the section my family had once eyed, for quick cash. The sale fetched nearly $600,000, enough to endow the foundation's first decade of awards. Reporters tried to spin the gesture into a slap at my parents. I framed it differently when asked. My grandfather believed wealth should travel forward, I said in an interview broadcast on public radio. This is how I honor him. Listeners wrote letters, handwritten letters, the kind older hearts still trust, telling me how the story reminded them of lost siblings, hard choices, lessons learned, too late. I answered every envelope. Connection I found could regrow where kinship had withered. Late spring, the estate bloomed with daffodils. I walked the lake shore at sunrise, mist curling over the water, and thought about the judge's gavel, my mother's shattered glass, my father's apology fading in the wind. Revenge had not been flames and fury. It had been truth laid bare under courthouse lights enforced by law. Somewhere behind me, the house creaked, the old beams settling, perhaps my grandfather's memory stretching in contentment. I whispered into the hush, "We are safe now." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The first scholarship application arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I remember because thunder rattled the stained glass windows in the foyer, and for a moment I thought the house itself was applauding. The envelope bore careful handwriting, blue ink, a little shaky, addressed simply to the Grandfather Lake Foundation. Inside, a young woman named Lucinda told her story, eldest of 5 working night shifts at a grocery store, dreaming of nursing school. As I read, the estate seemed to breathe. Floorboards released, their long-held tension, rafters sighed. I thought of my grandfather's steady hands, lacing fishing line, his voice, when he said real wealth traveled forward. I wrote Lucinda a personal note, folded a letter of acceptance, and placed both in a silver envelope. Before sealing it, I whispered, "You are exactly why this house still stands." Word spread quickly. Within weeks, the foundation mailbox filled with essays, transcripts, and photographs of hopeful faces. Evelyn helped establish a selection committee, 2 retired teachers, a carpenter who had apprenticed under my grandfather, and a local librarian with a heart for lost causes. We met every Saturday in the study sunlight slanting across oak shelves, voices low but excited as we weighed stories against limited funds. The discussions became a kind of balm. Where family had fractured, community stitched me back together. One morning, the carpenter placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Your grandfather would brag about you down at the hardware store." The compliment lodged under my ribs, warm and startling. Meanwhile, my parents' bankruptcy proceedings crawled through the courts, a slow-moving glacier of paperwork and regret. Reporters tried to resurrect drama, poking at old wounds, baiting me for commentary, but I gave them nothing new. My silence became its own statement. Without fresh fuel, the fire of public interest dwindled to embers. Yet healing is not the same as forgetting. I still woke some nights from dreams where my mother's wine glass shattered again, each shard reflecting my face. In those moments, I rose, padded through dark hallways, and stood on the back porch overlooking the lake. The water, black and silent, reminded me that depth often appears calm on the surface. I learned to breathe with it, slow inhale, slow exhale, until sleep returned. Spring yielded to summer, and with it came a letter from my sister. No lawyer's header, no legal threat. Just lines stationary, smelling faintly of lilacs. "Morgan, I attended one of the community forums you hosted. I sat in the back. You didn't see me. I watched you speak about opportunity and stewardship, and I realized something I should have understood long ago. You have always been the caretaker in this family. I am sorry for every word that tried to paint you otherwise. I know an apology cannot rewrite history, but I hope it can draft a better footnote. If you ever find space for a conversation, I will be waiting. A." I read the note twice, then placed it in my grandfather's desk drawer beside fishing licenses and faded photographs. Forgiveness, I decided, was like planting a tree. You choose the spot water, the soil, and trust time to coax roots downward. I was not ready yet, but I left room for roots. By midsummer, the estate hosted its first scholarship garden party. Volunteers strung lanterns between maple branches and tables were dressed in white cloths stitched by the Quilting Guild. Scholarship recipients mingled with donors, laughter carrying across the lawn. No champagne towers this time, just lemonade iced tea and trays of homemade pies cooling on the porch railing. I stood near the shoreline as Lucinda, now clad in crisp nursing whites, recounted her first week of classes to a cluster of benefactors. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had glimpsed a doorway and walked through. Watching her, I felt a quiet swell of pride, not the loud posting online kind, but the kind that settles into bone and makes even troubled shoulders square. The band struck up a gentle tune, fiddle guitar soft harmonies. A gray-haired couple began to dance on the grass shoes forgotten. Fireflies flickered at the water's edge. For a moment, the past and present aligned so perfectly, I half expected my grandfather to stroll down from the porch, suspenders snug, ready to spin me across the lawn. I closed my eyes and listened to the murmur of voices, the scrape of chair legs, the hush of lake water lapping the shore. This was the sound of restoration, not just of property, but of purpose. Later that night, after guests departed and lanterns dimmed, I wandered the halls turning off lights. In the mirror above the stair landing, I caught my reflection lines a little deeper around the eyes, hair tousled by evening breeze, but something softer too. Acceptance, perhaps, or the first glimmer of peace. At the study doorway, I paused. Moonlight spilled across the desk where Lucinda's acceptance letter once lay. I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for the lessons, old man." A floorboard creaked house or memory I could not tell. Either way, I smiled, closed the door, and let the corridor guide me toward sleep. The lake always looks different at dawn. Today the surface lies flat as polished glass tinted rose by first light, the air cool enough to make me pull my cardigan close around my shoulders. I sit on the weather-worn bench my grandfather built from cedar planks and let the quiet seep in. It has been nearly a year since the trial ended. 8 months since the foundation awarded its first round of scholarships, 6 weeks since Lucinda sent a postcard showing her clinical badge clipped to her pocket. In that time, I have come to understand something my younger self might have dismissed. Survival is not the same as living. Survival is keeping the roof intact, signing the legal forms, paying the bills. Living is what begins after the hammering stops. It is the slow recognition that the house no longer echoes with accusation that you can breathe without bracing for impact, that laughter, real laughter, sounds right in these rooms. I rise, follow the stone path along the shoreline, and pause beneath the willow whose branches trail the water. My grandfather planted this tree when I was 10. He told me then that roots matter more than branches. The older I grow, the truer those words feel. You can prune a broken limb, you cannot transplant a full-grown heart. Inside the house, the kitchen smells of coffee and cinnamon. Volunteers will arrive in an hour to prepare care packages for scholarship students moving into dormitories. Boxes of bed sheets, notebooks, and secondhand laptops sit stacked by the back door. The estate has become a way station, people. Drift in burdened by fear and leave carrying possibility. I like that. It honors the man who taught me to keep lines untangled and hooks sharp. Yet endings demand honesty, so let me offer some. I wish my mother would walk up the drive one morning, apology in hand, and willingness to change shining in her eyes. I wish my sister would come to a volunteer shift and stay long enough to fold blankets beside me. I wish forgiveness were a switch you could flip, rather than a garden you must weed. But wishes are wind-blown seeds. Some land in fertile soil, others do not. I can loosen my grip and let them fly. I keep a small box in the study. Inside lie 3 items: my mother's lilac-scented letter, my father's bankruptcy notice stamped, discharged, and the rusted key to the front door that my grandfather carried on a brass ring. Some nights I open the lid, breathe deep, and remind myself that memory is neither enemy nor ally. It is simply the record of what happened. What I do next, that part is mine alone. Outside, a blue heron lifts from the reeds, wings wide, and slow gliding across the water until it disappears into morning haze. I take that as my cue. There is bread to slice, tables to set, mugs to warm. Before I head back, I pull out my phone. Yes, even at my age, I can handle the thing, and open the channel where this tale began. "Good morning, folks," I say, camera pointed toward the lake glowing pink behind me. "I have a question for you. Have you ever stood on the far side of pain and realized it turned you into the person you needed all along? That is where I am today, and I would love to hear where you are. I end the recording with the invitation I promised myself I would keep. If you think I made the right choice, type the word right in the comments. If you have a better way to handle greedy families or broken hearts, share your idea below. Let us learn from one another. And as always, tell me where you are watching from. This lake has room for every story. I pocket the phone, inhale the scent of damp earth, and walk back toward the house footsteps light on dew-soaked grass. The porch door creaks a familiar, comforting sound, then closes behind me. Somewhere beyond the hills, a church bell chimes the hour, and for the first time in a long time, I realize I am exactly where I belong. Roots firm, branches reaching, heart open.